Hey everyone. Today I'm going to talk about how you should set up or pack up your reptiles when it comes to moving. I've seen a lot of posts in many of the Facebook groups that I am in over the course of the last several weeks, all asking the same question. What should I do for my reptiles? I'm moving across country, or I've got a 6 hour drive. What should I do? So I'm going to go over 6 things that I think should be at the forefront of your mind when it comes to the concept of moving and how to make sure that your reptiles get safely to your new home. I'm Jack. This here is Opal. You're watching Python Addiction. And again, hey everyone. Got my little boy Opal here. As you can probably see, very iridescent. He's my little co-host today. But we're going to talk about moving. A lot of different people are always concerned or wondering what's the best way to move their reptiles if they have a long move, they're moving cross country, how to do this kind of thing. And I'm going to focus more particularly on the driving aspect. If you're driving from point A to point B, whether your move is on the local side or if it's cross country or anything like that, I'm going to go over 6 different things that I think are important when it comes to looking at what you should be focusing on when it comes to moving your reptiles. The first is checking the laws for where you're going to move to. Like here, where I live in New York, there are some municipalities that don't allow reptiles. So looking up the local laws for your new location is something that you should do. Don't just assume, oh, the state laws say that this is allowed. Look at the local laws, call up the governing body for that particular municipality and stuff like that to make sure that your animals are allowed for where you're going to be moving to, because it's one of those things that would really suck that you get your new place, you sign your new lease or whatever the case may be, and then you find out that you can't have your bearded dragon or your snake or tegus are not allowed in that particular area or whatever the case may be. That would really, really suck. So taking a look at your local laws, and in conjunction with that, also making sure if you're like crossing a border. I've known several people that have moved from New York State to Canada and vice versa. Getting the proper permits in advance to make sure that when you're crossing the border for your exporting of the animals or importing, whatever the case may be, that everything is above board. That you have to do a lot of that kind of stuff far in advance. So look into that kind of stuff. The second thing, and I do have a list here that I'm kind of referencing today, but the second thing is looking at what the temperatures are going to be when you're moving. Are you moving during the summer months? Are you moving during the winter months? What's the temperature going to be like? Because that's going to take into account how you're transporting your animals to begin with. You can generally get away with not having to worry about extra heat or anything like that if it's more during the summer or early fall months or in the spring, versus making sure that you have some type of warm packs if you have to move during the winter. And other things that you can do when it comes to the actual travel aspect to keep things to temperature is use water bottles. Fill them up with some water that is probably around 100 degrees to 110 degrees, and put a blanket or some type of towel over top of that before you put your animals inside of the bin. And that's, again, something that I do when I do some of the shows that are in the colder months of the year. Is I'll use that yellow bin that I showed you earlier, and underneath the towel that's in there, I'll put a few water bottles that have warm water in them, just to keep the temperature a little bit more acclimated. Obviously, when you're traveling, you also want to make sure that the bins or the animals aren't getting direct sunlight being basked onto them through your windows while you're traveling, especially long distances, as that can amplify the heat and can cook your animals. So if you're doing a long travel and they're in, say, your back and you've got a window there, put a blanket on top of them. You can use a couple of like boxes and then put a blanket right over top of that to create a thermal area where they don't get so warm. The next thing that you have to take a look at is your space and how you're going to move everything. You don't want to use or consider having the animal in their enclosure when you're transporting them. That can be very unsafe with all of the vibrations and the moving around of everything while you're driving around. You're going to want to look at, depending on how many animals you have, of having a separate vehicle that is going to be traveling with you, or making a sole trip just to transport your animals as part of your whole move process. And I say this because you don't want to have your animals stored in the back of a box truck or a moving van or anything like that, because the temperatures are not regulated. They can get very, very hot during the summer months, and even earlier on when it's maybe cooler in the 60s or 70s, temperature wise, with the sun baking down on those big boxes and everything like that, it can easily get over 90 degrees, sometimes even over 100 degrees in those box trucks very, very quickly. And that can be a very bad situation for your reptiles when it comes to transporting them. So I recommend having a second vehicle or making a special trip just to transport your animals. Now, what are you going to transport them in? There's a few different things that you can use. One thing that you can use is like this right here. I have a just big bin that I got from Home Depot, and I put a blanket at the bottom of the bin, and as you can see, I have a lot of different bags inside of that bin. You can bag up your snakes, and they can all be transported in one bigger bin safely without a problem. This is actually another thing you can use aside from like snake bags or pillowcases when it comes to individually segregating your animals to put them into a bin, is using like Chinese takeout containers like this picture here. These types of containers work wonders in giving a nice small space to house smaller reptiles and very little area for them to move around in, but gives them a little bit of move around area so they don't get bashed into the sides and everything like that when you're driving. And if you really want to get fancy, you can do something like this and rig up an actual heat mat if you're doing a super long drive, and have the bin just sit on top of the heat mat, as is in that picture right there. There's lots of different ways that you can have things set up.
to
This is
where
actually how I transport my animals when I do shows. I bag them up individually, make sure the bags are all tied up nice and tight, and then that goes right into the back seat of my car and it gets buckled in. I use the towel as it helps to keep temperatures a little bit more regulated, and I also have the towel in there in case one of them has an accident. It absorbs things very easy. You can also use things like the Sterilite tubs or like this 15 quart tub that I'm showing right here. Works really well for some of your larger snakes or larger reptiles. When you're transporting them, you're transporting just the animal. Don't include their water or hide or anything like that. You can put some paper towel down just in case they use the bathroom while they're in there to keep things a little bit more clean and sanitary as far as that goes. But otherwise, just put the animal into the enclosure or into the bin and they can transport in that just fine. The other thing you're going to want is to have a area already set up at the new location. Not necessarily their enclosures, but an area that's warm enough to keep them for a while. I
uh,
have one clip here that's from Adams from WWR to where he shows he actually had with one of his moves, had a whole separate area that was warmer, like in the high 70s, low 80s, to where he piled up all of his animals for one of his moves. And that's perfectly fine. They'll be, unless they have very, very strict requirements, like if it's a rainbow boa or something like that with the humidity requirements, and if it doesn't have very stringent requirements, having them just sitting and chilling in tubs in a warm, ambient controlled room for a little while is not going to hurt them. To prepare your animals before you travel, don't feed them for at least 3 to 5 days before you travel, depending on the species. So they have less chance of regurgitation or anything like that. The other thing that I do suggest that you do, like especially with snakes, and if your travel is going to be longer than like 12 hours, is to soak your animals in a small bin of water the night before you start traveling or you packing them up to start your travels. I do this kind of thing with shipping animals. Put the snake into some water, let them get a good drink so they're nice and hydrated before not having access to water for a day or so, which in most cases is not going to be an issue whatsoever. So making sure that you have that. Like I said before, having making that special trip, if you can move all your animals first or move all your animals last when it comes to that aspect of things, plan it out accordingly to make sure that the animals are safe. I've helped a friend of mine move a couple of different times, and one of the very first things we moved was the animals to make sure that they were in their new location nice and safe before we even looked at moving the enclosures and everything else for them. Spent the day setting all of that up afterwards,
but
but that's pretty much my suggestions. Making sure that all of your animals, you can put multiple snakes, one in each bag, and put all of them into a larger bin to where they're all nice and secure, or use individual bins for larger snakes or larger reptiles to where they're all safe. You want to keep the amount of movement very, very little, because when you're driving long distances, especially, the vibrations can cause a little bit of stress to the animals. So you want to kind of minimize that to the best of your ability, and the least amount of space that you have for things to be shifting around. You don't want them sliding around from one end of a bin to another. But having the least amount of motion is going to be one of the best things to reduce stress in the move, because they will get a little stressed out. That's pretty much it. Making sure that you're taking care of a lot of the other move aspects in advance of the actual move. So if you like this, please do hit that like button, as that does help the channel out a lot. It lets me know the types of content that you're looking for. Also, don't forget to hit that subscription button if you're not already subscribed, and click the notification icon as well, as it'll notify you when I do new videos. I tend to do new videos every Monday. But until next time, I'm Jack. This again is Opal. You've been watching Python Addiction.